This is your global geopolitical briefing. In 2026, the world is witnessing a subtle but profound transformation, not through open war, but through shifting alliances, strategic distrust, and recalculated interests. At the center of this transformation lies the evolving relationship between the United States and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, widely known as NATO. For over 7 decades, NATO has been the cornerstone of Western military power and global stability. It has deterred major wars in Europe, projected power across continents, and reinforced a rules-based international order. But today, that foundation is being tested in ways not seen since the Cold War. The issue is no longer about external enemies alone. Instead, it is about internal divergence, a growing gap between what the United States expects from the alliance and what European nations are willing or able to deliver. Strategic priorities are no longer perfectly aligned. Political trust is eroding, and the assumption that the United States will always guarantee European security is no longer absolute. This moment represents more than a policy disagreement. It signals a potential turning point in global geopolitics, one that could redefine how power is distributed, how alliances function, and how conflicts are prevented or escalated in the years ahead. Structural reality of NATO deep analysis. To understand the current tension, it is essential to examine the structural reality of NATO itself. While NATO is often described as a collective alliance of equals, in practice, it has always been heavily dependent on the United States. The United States provides a disproportionate share of NATO's military capabilities. This includes advanced intelligence systems, strategic airlift, missile defense, cyber capabilities, and most importantly, nuclear deterrence. American military bases across Europe serve as both operational hubs and symbolic guarantees of commitment. Without this backbone, NATO's ability to respond rapidly and decisively to threats would be significantly reduced. However, this imbalance has also created long-term friction. For decades, successive U.S. administrations have expressed frustration over what they perceive as unequal burden sharing. Many European countries have historically underinvested in defense, relying instead on the implicit security guarantee provided by Washington. While this arrangement was tolerated during periods of relative stability, it has become increasingly controversial in an era of rising global competition and domestic pressure within the United States. At the same time, Europe's perspective is more complex. European nations argue that their contributions extend beyond military spending, including diplomacy, economic stabilization, peacekeeping missions, and humanitarian efforts. They also face different threat perceptions, often prioritizing regional stability, migration issues, and economic resilience over large-scale military confrontation. This structural asymmetry has created a paradox. NATO is strongest because of U.S. dominance, yet also most vulnerable because of its dependence on that dominance. As American strategic priorities evolve, the alliance must either adapt or risk becoming misaligned with the interests of its most powerful member. The 2026 crisis, deep geopolitical breakdown. The current crisis did not emerge overnight. It is the result of accumulated tensions that have reached a tipping point in 2026. At the heart of the dispute lies a fundamental disagreement over the purpose of the alliance. The United States has increasingly framed NATO as a partnership that should actively support its global strategic objectives. However, European allies have shown reluctance to align with certain U.S. military actions, particularly those perceived as unilateral or outside NATO's traditional defensive mandate. This divergence became highly visible during recent geopolitical conflicts, where key European powers declined to provide military support or logistical access for U.S. operations. From the American perspective, this raised serious questions about reciprocity. If NATO allies benefit from U.S. protection, should they not also support U.S. initiatives? From the European perspective, the issue is legitimacy and risk. Many European governments are cautious about being drawn into conflicts that may escalate unpredictably or lack broad international support. Domestic political pressures, economic considerations, and differing threat assessments all play a role in shaping these decisions. The result is a breakdown in strategic cohesion. Public statements from U.S. leadership questioning NATO's relevance have further intensified the crisis. Even more concerning is the ambiguity surrounding the commitment to collective defense, the very principle that underpins the alliance. When mutual defense guarantees are perceived as conditional rather than absolute, the credibility of deterrence begins to erode. Adversaries may test the alliance's resolve, while member states may begin to hedge their security strategies independently. In this sense, the crisis is not only political but psychological. Trust, once assumed, must now be actively maintained, and that is proving increasingly difficult. The implications of a weakened or divided NATO extend far beyond the transatlantic relationship. They have the potential to reshape the entire global security architecture. One of the most immediate consequences would be a shift in the balance of power in Europe. Without a fully committed United States, the deterrence posture against potential adversaries could weaken. This may embolden rival powers to adopt more assertive strategies, testing the limits of European defense capabilities and political unity. At a broader level, the erosion of NATO cohesion contributes to the transition toward a multipolar world. In such a system, power is distributed among several major actors rather than concentrated in a single dominant bloc. This increases complexity, as alliances become more fluid and less predictable. Economic implications are equally significant. Transatlantic tensions can lead to trade disputes, regulatory divergence, and reduced economic cooperation. As major economies recalibrate their relationships, global supply chains may become more fragmented, leading to inefficiencies and increased costs. Security cooperation beyond traditional military alliances may also suffer. NATO has played a key role in coordinating responses to terrorism, cyber threats, and maritime security challenges. A fragmented alliance could reduce the effectiveness of these efforts, creating vulnerabilities that non-state actors and hostile entities may exploit. Ultimately, the weakening of NATO is not just a regional issue. It is a systemic shift that affects how the world organizes power, manages conflict, and maintains stability. Experts analyzing the situation emphasize that the current trajectory does not necessarily point to an abrupt collapse of NATO. Instead, it suggests a gradual and complex transformation. One widely discussed concept is the idea of strategic autonomy for Europe. This involves developing independent military capabilities, strengthening defense industries, and enhancing coordination among European nations. The goal is not to replace NATO entirely, but to reduce reliance on the United States and create a more balanced partnership. At the same time, the United States is undergoing its own strategic recalibration. Increasing attention is being directed toward the Indo-Pacific region, where competition with emerging powers is intensifying. This shift reflects a broader prioritization of long-term strategic challenges over traditional alliance commitments. Another important factor is the evolving nature of warfare. Cyber operations, artificial intelligence, and hybrid tactics are changing how conflicts are conducted. NATO must adapt to these realities, but internal divisions make coordinated adaptation more difficult. Experts also highlight the resilience of institutions. NATO has survived previous crises, including disagreements over military interventions and burden sharing. Its institutional framework, shared history, and integrated command structures provide a foundation for continuity. However, resilience is not guaranteed. It depends on political will, strategic clarity, and the ability to reconcile competing interests. Without these elements, even the strongest institutions can weaken over time. Looking ahead, the future of NATO and its relationship with the United States can be understood through several potential scenarios. The first scenario is adaptation and rebalancing. In this case, NATO evolves into a more equitable alliance, with European nations taking on greater responsibility for their own defense. The United States remains engaged, but with a more selective and strategic approach. This scenario preserves the alliance while addressing its structural imbalances. The second scenario involves gradual divergence. The United States reduces its commitment, and Europe increasingly pursues independent defense initiatives. NATO continues to exist, but its role becomes more limited and less central to global security. This could lead to parallel structures and overlapping strategies. The third scenario is fragmentation. In this outcome, disagreements escalate to the point where the alliance loses coherence. Member states pursue separate security arrangements, and the institutional framework of NATO weakens significantly. This would represent a fundamental shift in the global order. Each of these scenarios carries different risks and opportunities. The direction ultimately depends on political decisions, external pressures, and the ability of leaders to navigate an increasingly complex strategic environment. For regions outside the traditional centers of power, including Africa, the evolving dynamics of NATO and U.S. policy present both challenges and opportunities. A reduced Western security presence could lead to increased uncertainty in certain areas, particularly where international support has played a stabilizing role. At the same time, it may create space for regional actors to take on greater responsibility for their own security and development. The shift toward a multipolar world also means that African nations have more options when it comes to partnerships. Instead of relying predominantly on Western alliances, they can engage with a broader range of global actors, negotiating agreements that align more closely with their national interests. However, this increased flexibility comes with added complexity. Managing relationships with multiple major powers requires careful diplomacy and strategic planning. Competition among external actors could create both opportunities for investment and risks of geopolitical entanglement. In this context, strategic autonomy becomes a key objective, not only for Europe, but for emerging economies as well. The ability to navigate a changing global landscape will be a defining factor in shaping future development and stability. The evolving relationship between NATO and the United States is not simply a policy debate. It is a reflection of deeper changes in the global system. For decades, the world has operated under a framework defined by strong alliances and clear leadership. Today, that framework is being re-examined. The future will likely be more complex, more decentralized, and more competitive. The question is not whether change is coming. It is how that change will be managed and who will shape the outcome. This has been your in-depth geopolitical analysis briefing. Stay informed. The world is changing, and the balance of power is shifting.